New York has over 300 skyscrapers. Chicago has hundreds more. Even Honolulu, a city of under 400,000 people, has more skyscrapers than London, a global financial capital of nearly 9 million. Rome, with a metro population comparable to Chicago, has exactly 4. This isn't a lack of money, ambition, or engineering ability. It's a deliberate, decades-long choice. And here's exactly why Europe stayed low while the rest of the world went up. The timing problem. When skyscrapers first emerged as a genuine architectural category in the late 1800s, pioneered in Chicago, and quickly adopted by New York, most major European cities were already centuries old, fully built out, and evenly zoned around dense, low-rise urban cores. There was no equivalent to Chicago's post-fire rebuilding boom or New York's open real estate race. European cities weren't experiencing the same explosive, land-scarce demand for vertical office space that drove American skyscraper construction in the first place. By the time global demand for tall buildings caught up decades later, European cities had already spent generations reinforcing an entirely different urban identity, the heritage wall. This is the reason cited more than any other, and it's not exaggerated. Many European city centers are protected, formally or informally, by preservation rules specifically designed to guard historic skylines and sightlines. London's 1938 policy protecting unobstructed views of St. Paul's Cathedral still restricts development in designated zones today, nearly a century later. Paris enforces a strict citywide height cap of 37 meters, roughly 12 stories, across most of the city, a rule reinstated in 2025 by Mayor Anne Hidalgo's administration, after years of legal battles over the 180-meter Tour Triangle Tower, a fight that dragged on for more than a decade before the tower was finally approved as a rare, isolated exception. The underlying fear driving these restrictions isn't abstract. European planners have openly worried for decades that a modern glass tower rising behind a landmark like the Eiffel Tower or a centuries-old cathedral wouldn't just look out of place, it would visually compete with, and potentially overshadow, exactly the historic silhouette that draws people to these cities in the first place. The Brussels warning. If European cities needed a cautionary tale, they got one. During the 1960s and 70s, Brussels demolished large sections of its historic urban fabric with minimal zoning oversight, replacing them with modern high-rises scattered with little regard for the city's existing character. The backlash was severe enough that it created its own term, Brusselization, now used across urban planning discourse to describe exactly this kind of careless, disruptive high-rise development. That episode became a widely cited reference point for why other European cities tightened, rather than loosened, height restrictions in the decades that followed. The post-war rebuild. World War II devastated huge sections of European cities, and the rebuilding period that followed shaped decades of urban policy. Rather than treating destroyed neighborhoods as blank slates for vertical development, the way American cities sometimes did, many Western European countries prioritized restoring damaged historic landmarks and rebuilding at a familiar, human scale. That rebuilding-era mindset, restore what was lost rather than reinvent the skyline, carried forward institutionally long after the physical reconstruction itself was complete. The economics. Even where height restrictions don't formally exist, the economics of building tall in a European city center are considerably harder to justify than in American or Asian cities. Land and labor costs in dense historic centers are extremely high, and the approval process for anything exceeding standard height limits typically requires special permits and a lengthy, uncertain review process. For many developers, it's simply more practical and more profitable to build shorter, denser buildings that don't require years of legal battles before a single foundation is poured. Where the skyscrapers actually went. Europe hasn't rejected the skyscraper outright, it's relocated it. Cities like Paris didn't ban tall buildings everywhere, they pushed them into designated districts specifically built for height, most notably La Défense, a purpose-built business district on the western edge of Paris where towers can rise freely without touching the protected historic core. London has followed a similar pattern, clustering its modern towers in the City and Canary Wharf financial districts while leaving the areas around St. Paul's largely untouched. Amsterdam and Barcelona have taken the same approach, building dense, high-rise clusters on their outskirts while keeping historic centers low. The cultural rivalry layer. There's also a less discussed cultural dimension historians point to. As American economic and cultural influence grew through the 20th century, a genuine rivalry emerged. Some Europeans viewed the skyscraper specifically as a symbol of a brasher, more commercially aggressive American identity, one many European cities actively didn't want to visually associate themselves with. Preserving a historic, low-rise skyline became, in part, a quiet statement about which values a city wanted its silhouette to represent. Putting it together. So why doesn't Europe build skyscrapers the way America and Asia do? It's not one single rule, it's a stack of them, reinforcing each other for over a century. Cities that were already dense and historic before skyscrapers existed. Formal preservation laws protecting cathedral sightlines and historic skylines. A rebuilding era focused on restoration rather than reinvention. A cautionary domestic example in Brussels that scared other cities straight. Harder economics for tall construction, inexpensive, tightly regulated centers. And underneath all of it, a genuine cultural choice about what a city's silhouette should say about its values. Europe isn't incapable of building skyscrapers. Cities like London, Paris, and Frankfurt prove that clearly, in the districts specifically zoned for it. It simply decided, city by city, law by law, generation by generation, that its historic skyline was worth more, standing exactly as it was. Subscribe to Faulty Blueprint, because sometimes the biggest decision a city ever makes is choosing not to build.